good morning.
Good morning, Monica.
So is there any special message you'd like to send out to your friends at NAPA, Eminence?
Well, I'd firstly like to thank them for the invitation. I very much admire the work that is being done by NAPA. It is high quality, it's gospel-based, it's Christocentric, it's a wonderful contribution, so I commend what you're doing and thank you for it.
So we're here obviously to talk about your experience, particularly over the last couple of years. Can you give us some thoughts about your time in prison? What surprised you? What gave you hope?
It was 13 months. It was a different time, which goes without saying. I'd visited prisons as a priest and a bishop. I'd mixed widely, and I had a very limited interaction with the other prisoners, so there were no great surprises there. I was surprised by the decency of the overwhelming majority of the prison officers, the warders. They would talk, converse, were quite human, decent, and not just with me, but I could hear the way they were dealing with the other fellows in solitary, and some of them were totally unreasonable, frightfully damaged by drugs. Now, I mean, the original sin exists amongst the warders too, but nonetheless, I was pleasantly surprised by their professionalism and decency. And the chaplain confirmed this too. I felt the prison was pretty well run.
What gave you hope inside the prison?
The virtue of Christian hope, of course, is different from human optimism. Christian hope tells you that no matter what your circumstances are in this life, eventually all will be well. That a good God is in charge, even though terrible things happen, natural disasters, big explosions, as for example recently in Beirut. But these things happen from the permissive will of God. Now that's different from human optimism. And I knew intellectually, forensically, my case was enormously strong. Many good lawyers said it should never have been brought to court. But after a succession of knockbacks, while I knew intellectually my case was still strong, I wasn't particularly optimistic in a human sense at all. I wasn't quite sure, especially after my appeal was knocked back, I wasn't quite sure what way the things would go. That was, I suppose, a psychological defence.
Being in prison, you were obviously not able to celebrate Mass for more than a year. How did your prayer life change?
Well, it changed radically simply from that fact, because I celebrate Mass daily. And also I had a habit of when people would ask me to pray for them on some significant issue, I would offer Mass for them, where obviously I wouldn't be able to do that. And I had many people writing to me for prayers when I was in jail, so I would say a memorare for their intention immediately, so that something would be done. In jail you've got no excuse that you're too busy to pray, so I had a regular prayer routine, and of the breviary, meditation, and I followed that spiritual reading generally, I followed that every day. And then on Sunday I watched Mass View at home at the impossible hour of 6 o'clock in the morning. And then I watched the American evangelists, Joseph Prince from California and Joel Osteen from Texas. And I would, in my journal, I'd make a theological critique of their of their efforts. But both of them are very fine preachers, and they got big following.
So, Your Eminence, you mentioned that you had a lot of people asking you for prayers. How did you keep in contact with people on the outside?
Well, it was mainly one-sided. I received, until I left, around about 4,000 letters, as I keep explaining to people. I didn't count them because I knew the trouble King David got into when he had a census of his people. God disapproved. So I didn't, the only letters, nearly all of which I replied to were fellow prisoners. Although my legal team counselled me not to do that, I thought as a priest I probably should. So with one or two exceptions, I replied to all those prisoners. Otherwise, I rarely replied. With some I did, a particularly poignant letter here or there. Some people from a couple of women from Texas wrote very regularly to me, and very stimulating and beautiful, interesting letters. Gave me something to chew on theologically and spiritually. So, and I kept in contact with the world through the television. I had the Herald Sun, which is a daily, not a broadsheet, not a highly sophisticated paper, but a pretty good newspaper. We were only allowed that 3 times a week in the assessment prison. Had to be ordered again every time. You couldn't put in a permanent order. That's one of the typical little humiliation of the prisons. And SBS is an ethnic television station here for the multicultural Australia. It's got good international news, so I would watch that most nights. So I was pretty well abreast of things, and of course people would send me cuttings. Friends sent me loads of articles. They realised that useful to have a bit of intellectual stimulation while I was there. So I kept myself occupied, and of course I wrote my journal. I thought I'd be in for 3 or so months. So I wrote 3 pages a day, which would have given me, I roughly estimated, a book of 250 pages, because I was there 13 months. So, and I considered not continuing to write, but I'm glad I did. It was good therapy, and it just I might have something to say that can help people.
You mentioned hearing from women from Texas. We're obviously streaming to an American conference at the moment. Any other American friends you heard from during your time?
Oh, many. I mean, perhaps my strongest supporter and closest friend in America is George Weigel. So he was a regular. I thought his articles, as always, were first rate, even when he was defending me. Raymond de Souza, of course, is another fine writer from Canada, Father Raymond de Souza. But the Cardinals, Cardinal Dolan wrote a number of times. Cardinal Mahoney, I'd been on the Vatican Finance Council before the Vatican Secretariat. where we had both battled ineffectually for years to improve the situation. Cardinal O'Brien from Rome, Cardinal Burke, Bishop Jim Connolly. I received a lot of letters too from American priests, Monsignor Jim Moroney. So I received, and many lay people from the States. I received a lot of help, a lot of help and a lot of support, for which I'm very, very grateful.
So, from the vantage point of prison and seeing the outside world, I guess, through the news and through the letters you were receiving from others, what was your perspective on the year that was while you were in prison?
Well, of course, it's now been dominated by the coronavirus. It began slowly enough. I didn't really anticipate it would spread to these pandemic proportions. Another area which very much interested me was Brexit. I was a strong supporter of Brexit. I felt if it had been Catholic Europe and not anti-Christian Europe, my reaction might have been slightly better. But I mean, the English have had self-rule for 1,000 years, and I was the Japanese ambassador to the Vatican was lamenting the Brexit result to me, and I said, perhaps a little unhelpfully but directly, I said, well, Japan wouldn't like to be ruled from China, and he conceded that immediately. Another area which was of concern to me was the Amazon Synod. I wasn't quite sure how that was going to turn out, and in the end it wasn't, the results weren't too bad. I felt that some of the people who were given leadership in the preparation of the Synod, one bishop who'd never converted a local resident in all these decades as a missionary, I found one or two of those things quite remarkable, but the end result was that as far as I could see there wasn't too much damage done. What gains there were, well, it would be for those who were present to say. But I, as always, I've kept a lively interest in what's going on in the world around me. In Australia we had terrible bushfires, then we had floods, so we had the cricket, the Test cricket, so which I follow closely. So I kept abreast of the world.
One of the things you must have been keeping abreast of while you were over there were the news coming out about the Vatican Finances. What are your hopes for the finances in the Vatican?
Well, you see, the Vatican is losing money every year. Was deteriorating even before the coronavirus. I think in the last 2 years before the coronavirus pandemic, my successor said they lost 50 million a year. With the arrival of the virus, that's got consequences for rents, investments, but especially it has consequences for the Vatican Museum. I mean, I can't remember the exact sums, but they'd bring in 50 or 60 million euros a year. I might, but it's a money of that order. Now that's almost completely gone. Now it's a little bit graphic to say that the Vatican's going broke, because it isn't. It does have not a big patrimony it'd be less than some of the great American universities, considerably less as a patrimony. But you can't keep losing money at the rate they are at the moment forever. So that it's a very fundamental reality. It's public knowledge. I'm not letting anybody into any state secrets, nor is it a state secret that they have a very, very looming and very considerable deficit in the pension fund. Now, nearly every other country in Europe has that too, but that's not much consolation. Now, I'm well out of it. I'm 2 or 3 years behind what people are thinking, but at least in a published sense, I haven't seen any suggestions that would really address what is a significant financial challenge, if not a radical one. I'm sure the Vatican can rely ultimately on the generosity and mutual support of people around the world, but if you've got 300 properties and you only generate an income of less than 100,000, there's something wrong with your system. And undoubtedly too, it's been bedeviled over the years by inefficiency and corruption. London property deals are probably examples of both, certainly an example of inefficiency at best. And because the church is not a business, it doesn't mean there's any justification for it to be run inefficiently or not to be very strong and vigilant against corruption. So I think the most, if not all, of the crooks are out of the system. You can never be quite sure, but of course you've got to be very vigilant. So I've got every confidence in my successor. They're heading in the right direction, but that promise has got to be brought to fruit. They've just appointed a new finance council. Quite a number of, half them almost, are women, highly qualified women, and I'm optimistic because that they will have a good look at the situation and take a very firm stand on what are the basic issues and not to be distracted into theorising or short-term consolations. So I have a qualified optimism.